Chileans killed. Yes, Pinochet. It means that we believe that human beings on a face-to-face level are able to communicate with each other, are able to work out problems based on mutual respect, and that as Americans, what we want of our nation, we want our nation to be bold and brave, but not with guns, and not with machine guns, and not with napalm. I personally, really, am not all that impressed by President Reagan's tough, warlike rhetoric. If he wants to do something that's really gutsy, and that it's really brave for a guy who does so well on the television, the master of the media, what I would do is challenge him to sit down before the television cameras of the entire world and sit down and talk to Ortega and the other people in Nicaragua and work out the problems based on mutual respect. Does he have the guts to do that? And I'm not sure that he does. I'm not sure that he has the answers to the sharp questions and the challenges that people throughout the third world would be throwing to him. You know, we live in a world today, and it really is depressing to think about it. We live in a world today where there are several 100 million people starving to death. They're starving to death right now. We live in a world where my guess is that between all the superpowers and the other nations of the world, close to $1 trillion are being spent every single year on weapons, on more and more nuclear bombs, on the most sophisticated nerve gases which can wipe people out and paralyze them. And yet, with all the brilliance and all the fine technology and all the robots and the great medical research that they do up there in the hospital and all the other hospitals, civilization hasn't advanced one bloody iota for the last thousands of years. All that these people can do is still say to each other, we're strong, you're weak, you do it our way, or we're going to kill you. A very profound, civilized remark. I think what we're here today is to show President Reagan and many people who don't have the courage that we have. Because what goes on in this country, primarily through the television and through the media, is that over and over again, all that the President of the United States has to say is that Nicaragua is communist, Nicaragua is Marxist-Leninist, and now the new thing is Nicaragua is terrorist. And if you say it over 100 times, it now becomes truthful. And then suddenly you see the professional politicians getting less and less bold in saying that maybe the President is wrong. Because, you know, appealing to people's hatred and their anger and their desire for revenge is very good politics. The truth of the matter is, it has always worked. And it's probably working today. And you're going to find many college teachers a little bit less likely to speak out against it. Social workers a little bit less likely to speak out against the imperialism that now goes on. And I think what our task is here in Burlington, Vermont, and in the other communities that have sister city relations, is to say that we ain't afraid of that and that we reject that mentality. That what the real challenge of civilization today is, and the challenge of the United States is, and it's an enormous challenge, and it's a difficult challenge, and no one has any easy answers. But the real challenge is, in a world which is economically disintegrating, the conditions in the third world today are as bad as they have ever been. And the challenge is, the challenge for tough people, Mr. Reagan thinks he's tough, the challenge for a tough person and for a tough society is how do we use our resources, our incredible wealth, our energy, not in military adventurism, but in working with people throughout the entire third world, working with the people in Nicaragua, in cooperation and in mutual respect, working with them so children don't have to starve to death, don't have to die of diseases which these people up there on the hill in our hospital know the answers to, where people can learn to read and write, can learn to relate to each other. That's the challenge that we face. And the guns and the bombs and the contras are going in exactly the wrong direction. What the Sister City program is to me is a human way to say to the people in Nicaragua, we are concerned about your problems, we respect you as human beings, and we want to work with you cooperatively to build a decent world. Thank you.
Mr. Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Greenspan, I have 4 brief questions that I appreciate you responding to. 30% of American workers earn poverty or near poverty wages. In fact, low-wage workers in the United States are now the lowest paid low-wage workers in the industrialized world. The minimum wage, as you know, is now $5.15 an hour. If it had kept pace with inflation from 1968, it would now be $7.33 an hour. Many of us believe that it's important to protect low-wage workers and to raise the minimum wage so that nobody in this country who works 40 hours a week lives in poverty. Could you make a recommendation to Congress? In your judgment, should the minimum wage be raised?
I do not. The reason I do not, strangely enough, Congressman, starts off with the same premise that you did, namely that I, too, am chagrined about the extent of dispersion of incomes in this country. And as I've said many times publicly, you cannot have an effective society unless you have the assent of all parties in it that the system is fair. And my concern about the minimum wage is it does not do what you suggest it does.
I would respectfully suggest the evidence.
Well, I understand that. I'll give you my reason.
I have 3 other questions. So you don't surprise me by telling me that you're against raising the minimum wage. Let me ask you the second question, and you can elaborate. And I apologize. We just don't have a whole lot of time. As you know, and I think agree with, the United States has the most unfair distribution of wealth and income in the industrialized world, with the richest 1% owning 40% of our wealth, more than the bottom 95%. Meanwhile, 20% of our children live in poverty. We have millions of people who are experiencing hunger. We have some homelessness. People can't afford health insurance, can't afford to send their kids to college. Could you briefly tell us what policies you would recommend to Congress to do away with or ease this disparity of wealth that we are currently experiencing?
Let me start, Congressman, by saying what I would not suggest. And what I would not suggest is means which would somehow obliterate the wealth of those who are in the upper income groups or upper asset groups, because there's no evidence to suggest at all that if you were to take the top 20, 50, 100, 500 people and essentially eliminate all the wealth that they had, that would improve the standard of living of anybody. So merely obliterating wealth or merely confiscating wealth strikes me as a wholly inappropriate policy if the purpose is to achieve higher standards of living.
But I think nobody is talking about obliterating or confiscating wealth. We're talking about fairness and the appropriateness of one person having $80 billion in personal wealth while children go hungry. My third question, Mr. Greenspan, is are you concerned? I know that you played an active role as chair of the Fed Reserve in orchestrating a bailout of the $5 billion hedge fund known as long-term capital. And you came before our committee, and what you had to say was very interesting. Are you concerned about such mergers as Travelers Insurance and Citicorp when they form a company with assets of almost $700 billion, 140 times as large as long-term capital? What happens if they fail? Who in God's name is going to bail them out? Are you concerned about that?
First of all, let me just say that we don't consider that bringing in private investors into the long-term capital management problem was a bailout. It was their money, their interest, and all we did was to offer them an office space to come around.
But you were concerned. That you were very concerned about the implications of failure.
Indeed, I certainly was.
If you're concerned about that failure, what about a failure of a company which is...
We would be concerned about a failure of any large institution. But let me suggest further. we do not believe that in the event that it turns out that a substantial institution fails, that they should be bailed out. In effect, what we may conclude, for purposes of stabilizing the system, that an orderly